Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the Tamba Breastfeeding Multiples webinar for health professionals. Firstly, let's introduce the presenters for the webinar. Okay, Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. I'm Kate Cameron. I'm breastfeeding counsellor and mother of 4, including twins.
Okay, and that's me there, Kate Valentine. I do the courses at Tamba and I have 14-year-old twins.
And I'm Helen Turrier. I'm the Support Services Manager at Tamba, another mother of twins and an older simpleton too.
Okay, Kate, could you go over the aims of the session today?
So, yes, the aims of the session are to answer many of the questions that expectant parents of multiples have and to talk about how breastfeeding multiples might work. We also offer lots of support at Tamba for expectant parents of multiples, including a webinar once a month that parents can log on to listen live and to ask their questions at the end. So there is no single experience of breastfeeding twins and triplets, and every family will find their own way and will draw on the information provided to adapt it to their own situation.
Okay.
So some of the common...
Okay, Kate. When we run these breastfeeding webinars for expectant parents, we always ask them before the webinars what their sort of questions are beforehand, what would they like covered, and there are always lots of common themes. Kate, would you like to go over some of these common questions parents have before they start on their breastfeeding journey?
So they ask whether they can breastfeed twins and triplets. Is it really possible? They often want to know how they'll cope with breastfeeding multiples when they have other children to look after as well. Obviously, they're aware that many babies are born prematurely when they are a multiple, and it can be more challenging at the beginning to breastfeed and get started when the babies are premature. They want to know how they'll manage after a C-section, coping with carrying, lifting, getting into position for feeding with more than one baby. And they want to know about expressing, so how to express, when to express, whether they should express antenatally, and whether they feed the babies together if they're feeding 2 at once, or whether they feed them separately, one after the other. And how do you feed babies together? What are the different ways of holding them to breastfeed? And a very common question is, do you swap breasts or not? Whether you allocate a breast to a baby, whether you keep swapping at every feed, or how you do it.
Sorry, Kat, I've added 2 more in there.
Okay. And worrying about complications such as tongue tie, which seems to be a very common problem these days. And some mums worry that if their nipples become sore when feeding, how will they ever give the nipples a rest, because they constantly need both breasts at every feed. And obviously getting enough sleep, how they can cope with the interrupted sleep in the early weeks with multiples.
Thank you, Kate. Lots of people worry that it's going to be difficult to feed multiples. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so the body is designed to feed more than one baby, and in the first few days this is hormone driven. The body doesn't know how many babies you've had, so it will just make milk to begin with on a sort of random basis, but then it becomes a supply and demand basis. So if your babies are feeding regularly and your body is responding, then you will start to make the right amount of milk for them. And the more you breastfeed, the more milk you make.
Thank you, Kate. So what can get in the way of the normal biological process of breastfeeding? Can you talk about this for us?
So premature birth can make it very difficult for mothers if babies are needing special care, if the body wasn't quite ready for these babies to arrive. That can make it slower, and the babies may not have developed their suckling reflex yet, so that comes at around 34, 35 weeks. So babies born before that will need help with feeding. If babies need special care, then they're separated from their mother, and the mother may not be able to have as much skin-to-skin time with the babies and as much time practicing having the babies latching to the breast. So that can take a while to get things going. Sometimes medical intervention. So if a mother is recovering from C-section or a lot of medical intervention at the birth, that can make it more difficult for her to get comfortable perhaps for feeding. Restricting feeds, if a mother is trying to feed her babies to a schedule, that can affect the normal biological process of the body responding to the baby's requirements. So that could potentially reduce the milk levels. Unrealistic expectations, I think mothers sometimes put a lot of pressure on themselves early on, and there are a lot of challenges to cope with if babies if you're dealing with more than one and they may have been born early. Sometimes incorrect information can impact on how breastfeeding gets going. So understanding how breastfeeding works is really important to help mothers get started with it. And lack of support. If they're surrounded by people who don't believe in breastfeeding or don't know that it's possible to breastfeed more than one baby, then that can make them feel less confident about their decision.
Thank you, Kate. About half of multiples will spend some time in special care, which can only be from a few days to a longer period of time. Kate, can you talk about how this may impact upon breastfeeding?
Yes, so as we said before, if babies are born early, they may not be able to breastfeed straight away, and so we'll need some help. Having lots of skin-to-skin time as much as possible with parents can help to get things started, start that hormone process happening. And certainly expressing breast milk at the start would be very helpful for getting the milk production going, but also to be able to feed the babies in the meantime when they're not able to breastfeed straight away. So the mum in the first picture here, she is holding her baby to her chest, and she's being fed nasogastrically. So she's got the feeding tube in her nose, down into her tummy, and the tube of colostrum so that the mother can hold it up high, and gravity would help the milk to go into the baby's tummy. And the dad there having skin-to-skin time with triplets. And Emma here shared her story about premature feeding of her twins. She tells us that they were born at 32 weeks and were fed through the IV drip first because they weren't mature enough even to take the milk directly into the stomach. She was helped to manually express her colostrum and then progressed to using a pump once the mature milk came through after a few days. She expressed between 6 to 8 times a day, so it's recommended that mothers feed between 8 and 12 times in 24 hours to stimulate the milk supply. And she was able to freeze her milk. And when she was on the neonatal unit with her girls, she could hold them skin to skin. And then the girls were able to move to tube feeding. So that's having the finger and the tube alongside the finger and the baby suckle on the finger. And then she was able to introduce milk to them by letting them feel it and taste it on a sponge on their lips. And at about 35 weeks, when the suckling actions had developed in the girls, she was able to introduce them to the breast and they could latch on. And she fed them individually at first, which is quite common with first-time mothers, to have time to get used to breastfeeding and to concentrate on one baby at a time. But then she started to introduce tandem feeding at around 37 weeks. And Joanna's story, she had boy-girl twins born at 34 weeks and did lots of skin-to-skin. And she looked at photographs of them while she expressed colostrum. That can help mothers to express, to look at pictures of the baby if you're not with them when you're expressing. She was able to store her milk in the fridge, and she took it to the special care unit as needed. And she expressed every 3 hours. And she found that expressing really helped her to bond with her babies. And due to various reasons, she decided that exclusive breastfeeding was the best option. And she expressed and bottle fed with 1 bottle of formula a day for 6 months.
Thank you, Kate. Can you talk about expressing, both expressing colostrum and expressing when milk comes in?
Yeah, so hand expressing is is usually recommended for the first few days because it's very difficult to express the small amounts of colostrum using a pump. So small amounts frequently is the best way to get the milk supply going and to provide your babies with what they need. This mum here is showing the hand expressing technique, and the syringes there have her colostrum in. And then between 2 and 5 days after birth, the mature milk starts to come through. And the 2 bottles there show the different colours, so the slightly yellowy tinted colostrum and then the whiter milk. And then we also get asked questions about antenatal expression of colostrum, for which mothers would need to seek medical advice from health professionals.
Yeah, and this is something that our community do get quite confused about, particularly because the NICE guidelines obviously monochorionics delivered from 36 plus 1 to 37 weeks, and the dichorionics 37 plus 1 weeks onwards to 38 weeks. So for many of our community, it's expressing before delivery is not an option for them, and so it's important then for the right information is given to them around supporting them expressing that colostrum once their babies have been delivered at 36, 37 weeks.
Thank you, Helen.
Okay, Kate, could you talk a little bit about expressing when milk comes in?
So when mum's milk comes in, she may change to using a pump for expressing. Lots of mums find this helpful, and the mum in the picture on the left here is using a double electric pump. So attaching the pump to her breasts and the suction action working to stimulate both breasts at the same time. This can be helpful if you are feeding more than one, because it's stimulating the body to produce twice as much. It's important to express regularly, so we do recommend between 8 and 12 times, because that imitates what their babies would be doing if they were breastfeeding. And it can be helpful, as we said before, to look at photographs, watch video clips, smell an item of your baby's clothing while you're expressing, to help stimulate the hormones required for letting down the milk.
Thank you, Kate. So what if your babies are born at 37 weeks? How might breastfeeding work for these babies?
So babies born 37 weeks onwards are full term and have developed their suckling reflex. So all being well, if they're not needing special care of any sort, then they would be able to have skin to skin, ideally, from the start. And the mother would be able to follow the baby's lead. So they would indicate, showing all the normal cues for feeding, and mother would respond to those cues. Multiples don't always have the same feeding patterns for obvious reasons. They could be different sizes, just different needs. So it might not always be possible to synchronize. So whether you swap babies and breasts is really up to the mother. Some mothers and multiples assign the same baby to the same breast forever. Some swap each day so that they stimulate the supply on both sides, and some swap at every feed. And breastfeeding separately or not, that is a personal choice. I think if mothers haven't breastfed before, they may find it useful to start off feeding separately, and then when they're confident, start feeding the babies in tandem. Or if they have had breastfeeding experience, they may feel that quite quickly they can feed the babies together. And really important to make sleep a priority. So if babies are napping in the day, then it's a good idea for mums to get sleep when they can.
Thank you, Kate. So big question here, how do you feed twins or triplets?
So if you want to feed your babies together, there are lots of different positions to use. If you want to do one baby after the other, you could cuddle one baby next to you, or have wake one baby up to feed before you wake the other. You could just do responsive feeding, which would be random, sometimes feeding them together, sometimes one after the other, just whenever they want to feed, or do a combination of all those different ways. And feeding triplets, you could do 2 babies at the same time and then offer the third baby both breasts afterwards. The black and white picture there, the 2 babies are being breastfed and the third baby is having a bottle of express breast milk, and you would rotate that system so that each baby had a turn of being fed the express milk in a bottle. You could feed one baby after the other, possibly quite time consuming, and you could feed whenever a baby shows an interest, be completely led by them.
Thank you, Kate. Parents often ask if you should feed your babies together or apart. Can you talk about the logistics of both ways?
So if you feed your babies together, it would possibly save time, and maybe if you're feeding one after the other, it gives you a chance to dedicate time to each baby to really practice and perfect the breastfeeding, but you would have less time obviously between feeds. Sometimes it can be useful to feed them together if they have different suckling abilities. So a stronger suckling baby would help the weaker feeder to stimulate the supply and to transfer the milk more effectively, because obviously the letdown in one breast creates the letdown in the other. And mums can rest while they're feeding. So whether you feed them together or separately, it does make you put your feet up and relax. So when you feed together, you could use the rugby hold, one baby under each arm, which involves mothers being supported with their back against a supportive chair, and usually using a feeding cushion of some sort, or a lot of pillows piled up. You could do the parallel hold, so babies are in the same direction as each other. One is sort of in the underarm hold and the other is across the body. Or the laid back position, which is very popular if mums are feeling tired. It's quite relaxing. It can be useful after a C-section if a mum is helped to get back into that relaxed position. And it can be useful if babies are struggling with a fast flow. Gravity sort of helps the milk go down into the tummy. Also good for reducing vomiting, and it can be good for winding babies as well. So top tips for latching 2 babies on together. These have been given to us by some mums we've spoken to. So they say practice when there's someone there to help you. So get help in hospital, and get help with anybody who is experienced in breastfeeding. Understand that it can take a while to master it. Sometimes you get one baby latched on and then you latch on the second baby and the first one's come off. Get your feeding station ready first, so have everything around you that you need. So mums often want the water and snacks and the remote control and their phone. You need muslins and breast pads and everything you need, so that once you're sat there, you've got what you need around you. Sitting down so the babies are within reach, so you latch one baby on and then you can scoop the other baby up if they're next to you or in front of you in the Moses basket. And they may need to keep relatching. It doesn't always work first time. And they can see some of the Tamba video clips on the website of mothers feeding their multiples. And one of the mums told us that when she had no one on hand to help, she would lie the babies either side of her on the sofa at a time when they obviously couldn't move or roll off. She would pick one baby up, lay her on the cushion, and then pick up the other baby and then latch them on. She says the same goes for when they had finished feeding. I placed one down on a muslin, burped the other one, and then did the same with the other, with lots of muslins around her.
Thank you, Kate. So what are the benefits of feeding separately?
So it can be useful for mums who are doing this for the first time and getting used to it. It gives them one-to-one time with their babies, and possibly it's easier to feed babies more discreetly out and about if they're being fed separately.
So Kate, a big question asked by parents to be new parents: should your babies have their own breast, or is it best to swap breasts? Can you give some sort of guidance on this, Kate?
I think it could be a good idea to swap breasts to evenly stimulate them, and also it means that the babies don't get particular about one breast in case you don't get it right one day. They won't mind. So maybe it's a good idea to keep swapping. But it might be helpful just to swap at the beginning of each day, just in case one baby's having lots of snacky feeds and one baby's feeding for longer feeds. Maybe not to swap during the same day, but to swap every day. Some babies do prefer their own breast, and the mother decides that she will keep that baby on that breast for the rest of the experience. And it could be a good idea to swap them regularly if one baby is not stimulating the breast as well. The other baby can do that job for him or her.
Thank you, Kate. So what about partners? What can they do to help?
So there's lots for partners to do when there's more than one baby. They can offer practical support, so keeping the household running and looking after everything else so that mum can really focus on the breastfeeding. Also giving the emotional support. It can be incredibly challenging in the early days with more than one baby, and especially with the feeding if the mother is choosing to breastfeed. So very important that partner supports that decision to feed. And finding other help as well. So if mother needs other support and encouragement and information, then making sure she's got access to that. And obviously with more than one baby, there's a great opportunity for partners to be part of it and to spend a lot of one-to-one time with each baby. And there's a lot of nappies to change.
Indeed. Okay, so parents who've got other children already really do worry about how they're going to cope the logistics of it all. Can you give some tips for these families?
So employing some other support could be handy. Getting support from family members or friends, having someone who could spend time with your other children, possibly doing the preschool run for you or whatever help you might need, school run. Preparing the older children is really important so that they understand that there's going to be new siblings, and making them feel part of it so that the babies belong to them too. And one tip we've been given is the special box or bag of toys that comes out just for breastfeeding time. So maybe some new toys that you could gather up in the weeks running up to the baby's arriving, so that your child gets excited about the breastfeeding time rather than dreading it. And those toys go away again at the end of the feed, and the older child can look forward to them coming out again for feeding. And one of the tips we've had is that in the early days, our toddler, who was 2 after the babies were born, did end up watching a bit more TV than usual when I was feeding a lot. And when the baby settled into more of a routine, I tried to coordinate feeds with when he was eating or napping or otherwise occupied. And I also made sure certain toys were out before sitting down to feed, and learnt to play some games one-handed or with my feet. I would also feed on the sofa, which meant he could snuggle up to us, see what was happening, and be read to whilst the baby's fed. And you can also have a jigsaw on a tray on your toddler's lap, or toys that you can play together.
Thank you, Kate. Another really big topic is sleep, or the lack of, and getting into a routine. Can you give any sort of suggestions on these two topics?
Yeah, so getting enough sleep is really crucial for the sanity and really challenging to get. So keeping the babies close by at night, so that there's minimal disturbance during the nighttime feeds. Having a baby-led routine, so the babies feed when they want to, which means they're actually ready to feed and they have an enthusiastic and worthwhile feed. Then hopefully they settle well afterwards, and that's when the mums need to grab sleep. Learning to feed lying down can be helpful because you can doze while you're doing it, and it's more restful. Quiet response, that means not switching the lights on, not talking too much to your babies, not stimulating them in too many ways during the night feeds. And if mums can avoid nappy changing at every wake up and feed, that can be useful, because obviously the nappy changing is very disturbing. Catching up with sleep in the day is really important, so mums have to make that a priority and not worry about anything else. If the babies are napping, it's a chance for them to put their feet up, and even a 20-minute cat nap can be very rejuvenating for a mum breastfeeding multiples. Having a bit of a change of scene and a tiny amount of exercise can be useful, if that means a walk around the block between feeds to get some air and to just get out of the house, because that can be hugely challenging for mothers of multiples, just to get out. And it's important to have some routines to other elements of your day. So although we don't recommend trying to put a routine in place for feeding, there can be routines for mum in the sense that she can have her shower at a certain time, she can get out for a walk around the block, she can have time for her own food and meals. And if she can try to encourage feeding together, then less time is spent feeding. So as the weeks go by, this might be more possible to synchronize the feeding. And if she doesn't want to feed them together, she could breastfeed one and then wake the other one or two, or do a combination of all those things, depending on what works for her on any particular day.
Thank you, Kate. So what about mixed feeding? We know that lots of parents of multiples do mixed feed. Can you discuss this topic in a bit more detail?
So initially, it's recommended, based on research, that mothers build up their breast milk supply before they supplement. So if possible, it's a good idea to express or breastfeed enough to provide the babies with all their feeding from breast milk alone. And feeding little and often will help to do this, and expressing little amounts often as well will help to boost the supply if necessary. If mums want to introduce formula feeds or feel they need to, then separate formula feeds are better than routinely topping up with formula after every breastfeed. So it might be that once or twice a day the babies receive a formula feed separately from their breastfeeding. If breastfeeding is going well, though, it's recommended not to use a bottle in the early weeks, because it can confuse babies. The suckling action required is different at the breast compared to a bottle. So while breastfeeding is getting established, it may be a good idea to avoid bottle teats early on. But if breast milk supply seems to be dropping, or there doesn't seem to be enough for more than one baby, then mums can express a little amount after every breastfeed, which will stimulate the milk supply to produce a little more next time. And that can happen over several days or a few weeks to gradually build up the supply. So here are some mums' experiences of mixed feeding. At tea time, my partner would give the babies a bottle to give me a break from feeding. I would breastfeed them then. He would give them another bottle late in the evening. This gave me a break, as well as giving him time to bond and cuddle the babies. Another mum said, I introduced the bottle at about 7 weeks. I then got them into a routine of bottle, followed by bath and into the sleep suit. I gave them a breastfeed before they went to sleep, and bingo, we were in a bedtime routine, which worked well. I continued with this approach of mixed feeding, breastfeeding plus one bottle at 5 p.m. until the boys were well established on solids, whereupon I went back to just breastfeeding. And someone else said, we mixed fed our twins. They started being breastfed, and then after a few weeks, we introduced an evening bottle to give me the longest possible window for sleep. It worked well, and we made sure each feed was purely breast or bottle, and they had no trouble with either, possibly because they started introducing the bottle after a few weeks.
Thank you, Kate. It's getting support is often really important. Can you give some suggestions about getting support?
Yeah, so it's quite helpful before you have your babies, I think, to think about what your priorities are going to be, whether it's looking after and entertaining older siblings, whether it's that you want help with laundry or housework or meals or walking the dog or whatever it might be. And then to think about who you have available, whether you have family close by who are willing and able to help you, whether friends have offered support and what you could enlist them to do for you. And really important to have people who support your decision to breastfeed and believe in it. And then to think about where you can go for other help. So what can you afford? If it's important to you to have the house cleaned, would you have somebody in to do that for you? Whether you can afford some home help in the early days, which might be really useful to get you through the most challenging weeks. And the support doesn't have to mean feeding the babies. It's actually really important that the parents do the feeding. So it can be that people come in to help look after you or older children. And some of the tips that mothers have given us are: take pride in what you've achieved, remember why you wanted to feed, be realistic about what you can do in the early days. It can be hard in the beginning, but it gets easier after the first few weeks, and it's really worth it. Someone's put here, it's a bit of a trial and error, and breastfeeding takes a lot of perseverance in the early few weeks and takes a lot of time. And 8 weeks in, I'm feeling much more confident. Enjoy it, cherish the moments when you've been sat in front of the telly for hours feeding, because soon this will be replaced by running around after toddlers.
Thank you, Kate. So there's lots of support that Tamba can offer. Helen, can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so we have a Breastfeeding More Than One booklet, which is available to download on our website. It also is given to all parents that attend one of our Tamba antenatal courses or our Tamba Practical Preparing for Parenthood course. We also have our Breastfeeding Peer Supporter scheme. So these are all trained breastfeeding facilitators who have also successfully breastfed their own twins or triplets as well. It is initial contact is via email to tambabreastfeeding@gmail.com, and they respond back, and they can organise a time to chat via phone or Skype with the parent, and they respond to both antenatal queries and postnatal as well. We have our breastfeeding webinars, which go into a lot more detail than we've gone into today for our parents, and also answer their individual questions at the end of the webinar. We run those each month, and they are extremely popular because parents can do them from their own sofa. So nothing, particularly for parents who've already got toddlers or older children, there's no childcare to organise. And once or twice a year, we do run a physical course in London for small groups of mothers as well. Our Tamba Twin Line is our free phone helpline service. It's open every single day, 365 days of the year. It's open from 10 a.m. till 1 p.m. and from 7 p.m. till 10 p.m. at night. And the reason it's open at those times is because obviously toddlers and babies might be having a nap at some point, or be at nursery school in the morning, and then in the evening, that's when we all tend to get a bit overtired, overwhelmed, and we need that listening ear. So Twinline are all trained listeners. They're all parents of multiples themselves. They're all trained in telephone listening skills. They're there to listen and to signpost to the most appropriate place for support, either videos on the Tamba website or Tamba resources, or to encourage them to get in contact and feel confident talking to their community midwife, their health visitor, and just talking through any worries or anxieties that they might have on their parenting journey.
Kate, do you want to talk a little bit about further information? We do have a fact sheet at Tamba we send to everybody who attends one of our webinars with lots of information on sort of products and expressing. But would you talk a little bit more about this information here?
Yeah, so the Mothering Multiples book by Karen Kirkhoff is very popular. We have Bump to Breastfeeding DVD and the Small Wonders DVD available on the Best Beginnings website. Information about breastfeeding cushions. So Peanut and Piglet is a very popular cushion. Threepenny Bits and Harmony Duo. And we have different makes of breast pumps, all very popular with Mums and Multiples, Ardo, Avent and Medela. Discount for Tamba members available as well.
So
And if you have any, sorry.
fine.
If you have any other questions following the webinar, you can email support-team@tamba.org.uk.
Brilliant, thank you, Kate. I hope that's provided lots of information for people. And as Kate has said, anything else that we can support, help with, do email through. And we really do want to support families who want to breastfeed their multiples. Thank you ever so much, Kate and Helen.
Thank you.